So let's take it to the next level and see how to make structured documentation with different parts that are interconnected by links. Now we're starting again in the index.rst file, and I added a single line here which says, for more information about how to use this library, see the API. And there's a special syntax here, and basically this is a link syntax which is very similar to the link syntax we saw for a URL link for the World Wide Web. But in this case it's kind of an internal link which will link to a different part of your documentation. And this ref here is a keyword that says we're adding a reference, and here API is the actual name of the target we want to link to. And I added a new file called api.rst, and this file will be picked up automatically by Sphinx, but it's not enough for the link to work. If we switch to the file, in the first line here you see I added some code, and this is actually what we call a link target. And that's how Sphinx knows where to link to if we say we want to link to the API. So if we start a line with two dots like this, that means we're giving Sphinx a directive. And in this case it's a link target. And a link target is given by an underscore, and then the name of the target, which in this case is API, and then a colon. So basically when in index.rst I say ref API like this, this will generate a hyperlink to the target defined in the other file with this directive. So the fact that my file is called api.rst doesn't really have an effect on how my links work. Now the rest of my API file is structured like the index file. Paragraphs, headers for sections, we have a main header here which says API documentation. I have subheaders like generating a maze. I actually have subheaders for which I chose to use tildes. So basically here we have 3 levels of headers. Now I've added sections for the various classes, functions and constants I want to document. So if I scroll down a bit, we see here that this section will document one class, and this section will document the recursive class, and this will document the maze class, and going down, this section will hold documentation for the run function. Now I didn't include any actual documentation for these classes and functions here, but in a moment we'll see how to fill that in automatically from the doc strings in our code. But for now I want to focus on using references for a moment. So I have marked all my sections with a directive that tells Sphinx what kind of structure it's documenting. Now marking your sections like this will do several things. First of all, it allows you to link to that specific section in a semantic way. So as you see here in the first paragraph, I can now link to the documentation for the generate function here with a special syntax. I use the func keyword, which says I'm linking to a function, and the function I'm linking to has a name generate. And this will generate a link to this section here, which is marked with this function directive. And again, the link syntax is familiar. I have the backticks here that give the name of the target I'm going to link to, and I use a word between colons that tells me what kind of structure I'm referencing. Now, similarly, we have links to classes, and we can have links to other Python constructs as well. Now finally, here's a plain link made by simply putting backquotes around a word and adding an underscore. It will link to a target called constants, and as you see, if we scroll down here at the end of the file, here's a link target called constants. And this is exactly the same syntax we used at the top of the file for making a link target called API. But the way we reference it, if I go up again, is a little bit different. When linking to the API in index.rst, I use the syntax with the word ref. But in the case of linking to constants, I'm using just backquotes and an underscore. Now this works pretty much the same, but the links will look differently in the HTML output. Let's check it out. And here we're back on the index page, and scrolling down a bit, here's my new line in the index page. And as you can see, my link to the API documentation doesn't simply say API, but actually as the link text, it uses the title of the section I'm linking to. So if I click this link, we see that the title of this section is API documentation, and that's exactly what we saw in the link text. Whereas for the constants link, I simply see constants, We can also see here links, for example, to functions. So this will link to my generate function. If I click it, we move to the section for the generate function. Now, going back to our index page again, there's another thing I want you to show. First of all, there's an index. We can click it and it contains all the objects we're documenting. So I can click, for example, Crosscal here, and we will jump straight to the documentation for that object. And again, going back to the index page, we also see a table of contents here. Now, going back to my restructured text, if we look in the index.rst and I scroll down, here we see a TOC tree directive. This was generated by the quick start script, so I didn't add it myself. But what I did add myself here is API. And basically that's the name of a file I want to add to the table of contents. So here I say I want to add the API file to the table of contents. It also says let's use a depth of 2. And then if we go back to our HTML output, you can see what that means. Because we see here the first level, which is the top level title of my document, as well as the 4 subsections, generating a maze, the maze class, etc., etc. But this third level, remember we had a third subsection level, isn't represented here. And that's because we're telling the TOC tree directive that we only want to have 2 levels in our table of contents.